Hi, Federico. And first of all, let me say thank you so much for having me representing Merkle Science at today's event. So like Federico kindly introduced, my name is Ian, and today, on behalf of Merkle Science, I will be talking about how criminals are using DeFi for illicit activity. Now, just to introduce myself a little bit more detail. So I'm part of the founding team at Merkle Science, where initially when we first started the company, my role had me splitting my time between business and product. But then I transitioned to head up our investigation unit for some time before transitioning to head up partnerships. So with that in mind, I have worked on a couple of cases in the past, and today with the rise in DeFi, it is very exciting. Interesting, I would say, what we are seeing happening on these platforms. So for the benefit of those of you who may be hearing about Merkle Science for the first time, allow me to just do a quick introduction. Merkle Science is a next generation predictive cryptocurrency risk and intelligence platform. And we help crypto businesses, financial institutions and government basically detect, investigate, and prevent the illegal use of cryptocurrencies. And we do this by offering various software solutions, training, and intelligence reports, all centered around incident response, risk assessment, surveillance, and forensics. Now, enough about the boring stuff. Let's get to why you guys are actually here. So decentralized finance, DeFi for short. Over the last couple of months, I must say, along with the rise in NFTs, DeFi is something that has garnered a lot of attention. And for those of you who follow, crypto media, unsurprisingly, you might have read in the news, these days almost weekly about all the different, DeFi platforms that are being exploited. And so in today's presentation, before I even actually start addressing how criminals are using DeFi for their illicit activity, I thought it would be useful to first begin by some case studies, right, in order to set the scene. Now, in the interest of time, I only do have 20 minutes to present. I will not be covering all the case studies in detail, but specifically in these case studies that I bring up, I will be talking about which part of the DeFi system, these bad actors managed to exploit. And then, towards the end of the presentation, I'll tie it all in and, talk about, again, how they're exploiting various characteristics of DeFi in order to facilitate money laundering. So let's begin with our first case study. Now, for those of you, again, who've been following the news, you might have read, about a month ago that Cream, a very popular DeFi platform, recently suffered its third exploit. Right? Without going into details, what you guys need to know is basically the attackers found a vulnerability in the platform's smart contract and was able to exploit that vulnerability in order to steal Cream's assets and tokens. And this was done through what we call a flash loan attack. Now, again, without going into too much technicalities, a flash loan attack is basically, when an actor would utilize a smart contract in order to execute a series of mini transactions within a single transaction, right? So a smart contract, for those of you who are not aware, is basically a self-executing computer program that would follow the instructions of the user. And what the attacker in the Cream hack basically did was that he utilized a single smart contract in order to execute all these transactions that you see at the same time, right? So I want to repeat, a single transaction executed all of these transactions you see over here. To visualize that, this is what it looks like. Before the transaction, and again, this is a single smart contract transaction, and this is after the transaction. Now, all of this took place in a single smart contract transaction. There were various interactions from the attacker's wallet to other DeFi platforms, other exchanges, in order to conduct instantaneous, swaps. So this is case study number one. Case study number two. Couple months back, you guys might have read about an exchange getting hacked, right? So Liquid, an exchange based out of Japan, with also presence in many other jurisdictions, unfortunately suffered a hack in August 19, right? Where they detected unauthorized access to some of their crypto wallets managed at Liquid. Now, again, without going into detail as to what happened specifically, how that took place, the key thing to take note is, post the event, through investigations, Liquid and various blockchain analytics firms were then able to identify that of all these assets that were stolen, a huge portion of them was not only sent to other exchanges, and by that I mean CeFi, centralized exchanges. A portion of it was sent into, well-known mixers like Tornado Cash, but interestingly enough, there was a significant portion that was also sent to DeFi swapping venues, right? And finally, case study 3. Case study 3 is the Bondly exploit that also took place, recently, I think within span of 1-2 months. Bondly Finance is a DeFi project that suffered a hack. Apologies, it's on July 15, where the attacker was able to mint 373 million Bondly tokens. And out of those 373, the attacker then sent 200 million into Zentrust in order to exchange it for Zen Bondly tokens. And a significant remainder of that, the exploiter then sent to AnySwap, which is a cross-chain system, in order to swap his tokens onto other protocols, right? So he utilized a DeFi platform in order to do cross-chain transactions. Now, what do all these 3 case studies have in common? Yes, they all involve cryptocurrencies. Yes, they all involve an illicit actor targeting, an organization. And yes, they all involved DeFi. But of the 3 cases, if you remember, the first one being Cream exploit, the second one being Liquid, and the third one being Bondly, of these 3 organizations that were targeted, only 2 of them were actually DeFi platforms. So why am I talking about the Liquid hack as well? Well, the reason for me bringing up these 3 case studies is not actually to focus on the exploitation that these organizations suffered. What I actually want to draw your attention to is how the criminals utilize DeFi in order to launder the tokens that they had stolen from these 3 organizations, right? In case study number 1, the bad actor basically used a smart contract, which is a key function of DeFi, in order to execute, again, many transactions under one single smart contract, right? And this example, the point that I want to get across is what makes DeFi investigation so tricky, and what makes DeFi so appealing to a lot of these bad actors is the fact that they can use smart contracts to automate a lot of their transactions and in fact bunch them together so that they all happen in real time. Case study number 2, Liquid, right? What's noteworthy is although the funds were stolen and a significant portion of them were sent into centralized exchanges and mixers, still a significant portion was sent into DeFi because, again, these bad actors recognize that DeFi platforms are very good avenues for them to swap their asset, which can then make it difficult for investigators to continue tracking. And finally, with the Bondly exploit, the point that I want to get across is when we look at DeFi, we can't just focus on DeFi platforms and protocols within a single blockchain. Today there are more and more companies out there which are building cross-chain swaps that also leverage on DeFi, which allows users to basically take their asset and swap it and issue it on another protocol. And again, this makes it more difficult for investigators to track and continue the trail of source of funds because sometimes these swaps may end up breaking that trail, especially in instances if these swaps, for whatever reason, don't actually happen on the main chain. So with these case studies then, right, I would like to then talk about why is DeFi so popular for money laundering. Number 1, criminals love DeFi because DeFi is built on top of blockchain, which means that at the entire process, criminals retain control of the asset, right? Unlike traditional, white collar crime, oftentimes the misappropriation of funds may take place within a financial institution, right? And so these criminals are oftentimes, in a rush to cash out. On top of that, they may fear that if their account is identified, their funds may then be seized, right? Or the financial institution may be contacted by law enforcement in order to, seize those assets. But in DeFi, these criminals do not have to worry about, situations like this, because as long as they retain the private key of the wallets, they retain total control of not just the asset that they misappropriated, but when they swap those assets to another asset, again, those assets go directly back into their control. Another reason that DeFi is so popular is because of its ability to be accessed by anyone, anywhere, and anytime, right? What this means is that criminals today, through DeFi, have access to a 24/7 convenient way for them to liquidate the misappropriated assets, and it provides them an easy way for them to cash out, where all they really require is a computer and an internet access. Number 3, DeFi, again, leverages upon smart contract technology, which are automated computer systems. What this means is that all trades and swaps on these DeFi platforms are not only done automatically, but because they're built on blockchain, they are designed to be irreversible. What this means is that from a criminal's perspective, they can get a lot of assurance that once they've successfully managed to convert, their misappropriated asset into a different digital asset, that transaction cannot be reversed, and they can then use that new asset in order to conduct other activities. And building upon case study number 1, the other thing about these automated systems utilizing smart contracts is the fact that multiple transactions can all also be executed at the same time, which again allows them to execute their attack in a very quick and seamless manner. Additionally, and Nathan talked about this in the presentation previously, the other reasons why DeFi is so popular is because regulations today have not yet caught up, right? And by that specifically, I mean in many different jurisdictions, DeFi platforms are not regulated, which means that there is no requirement explicitly for these platforms to do things like KYC and AML, which again makes it very attractive to criminals who want to operate under this cloak of anonymity, right? Where they can, with any given wallet, through a MetaMask, simply connect to these DeFi platforms and immediately transact with them without disclosing their identity or without giving up any personal information about themselves. And finally, DeFi is also very popular for money laundering because, it is a way for these criminals to try and obfuscate the source of funds from blockchain analytic firms like ourselves, right? And what do I mean by this? Now, the way that a lot of blockchain analytics firms' algorithms work is that when we conduct tracing, oftentimes, the algorithms work such that when we trace the source of funds to, let's say, an entity, be it an exchange or a DeFi platforms, oftentimes the analysis would stop there. And the reason for this is because, tracing past an exchange or a DeFi platform becomes very challenging when a lot of these DeFi platforms and exchanges basically act like mixers, where they consolidate, all their users' funds into a single wallet where withdrawals are then processed out of. So because of that, and because of the way the algorithms are designed, a lot of times, when our systems trace source of funds to, let's say, a DeFi platform, we tend to just stop there. And so what this means is that, if criminals are successful in moving their funds into these DeFi platforms, oftentimes, certain blockchain analytics firms may not then be able to detect that the funds coming out was actually, converted from an illicit source. The other way that criminals may try and obfuscate the source of funds, through DeFi platforms, will be to utilize cross-chain transactions, as seen in case study 3, right? Where they may then take funds from a certain on a certain protocol, swap it or reissue it on another protocol, which breaks that link, right? Which again, from a blockchain analytics perspective, if we're doing tracking, all we can see is that this that the funds have been newly minted at a certain date from a certain wallet, but then we may not have full visibility as to where that asset originated from in the previous blockchain, right? So for all these reasons and more, right, DeFi is today, very popular among criminals for money laundering, and oftentimes in a lot of the cases that we work on, be it theft, ransomware, oftentimes we do see the digital asset flowing into these DeFi platforms as a way for these criminals to then, cash out. And so finally, some examples of how DeFi can be used for money laundering. A lot of people, when they think of DeFi, they simply assume that, okay, criminals would use DeFis in order to take their misappropriated asset and swap it for another asset, right? And because these DeFi platforms don't do KYC and AML, there's nothing to detect that a stolen asset was used to swap for a clean asset. But this fails to take into account all the different things that DeFi platforms allow users to do. Because we must remember at the end of the day, from the criminal's perspective, what they want to do is to be able to convert their stolen assets into a new asset, which ideally is not known to anyone to be linked to their criminal activity. And so while swaps may be one way for them to do it, there are a couple of other ways that they can use DeFi in order to convert their assets. Another example would be for them to use their stolen assets as collateral, right? So a lot of these DeFi platforms allow you to collateralize your digital asset in order to issue stable coins or another token. And although a lot of these platforms only allow you to collateralize up to 75% of the value, we must understand that from a criminal's perspective, allowing them to deposit $100 of stolen assets in order to issue newly minted stable coins that are only worth 75% of the value in itself by itself very valuable to these criminals, right? Because it allows them to do very quick conversions. And finally, and so I'm not going to talk in too much detail because I know I did allude to it previously, there is of course the ability for them to do cross-chain, right? Where they can simply lock up their token on one blockchain, issue it on another blockchain, which looks like it's newly minted, which can again provide them with an easy way to convert their assets. So with that, I know I'm coming up on time. I see Federico already eyeing me, right? So with that, I'm just going to end off by saying we do see the DeFi space evolving. As Nathan alluded to, there are new regulations coming in. There are increasingly, DeFi platforms that are opting to do KYC and AML, as well as there are, new solutions being built in order to monitor and address these risks. And with that, I just want to show one example of a DeFi platform that has already integrated KYC to really drive home the point that there are companies already doing it, right? And I'm excited to see how the space evolves. So with that, I come to the end of my presentation. I know I might have gone a little bit over time, but hopefully everybody found it useful. If you have any questions, do feel free to reach out and I'm happy to take them anytime.
Very well done, Ian. So again, we have a lot of questions for you. Unfortunately, you have time maybe only for a quick one. So let's have a look at the presentation that we were asked through Slido. Okay, so maybe you can stop sharing your presentation so we can share the different questions. Or maybe, okay, here it is. So we have, let's pick one because we don't have enough time. There was a question on KYC I read, which was very interesting. Let's see if we can have it online. But the question was about how you can implement KYC with DeFi.
So quick, the answer to that, is there actually a desire from DeFi platforms? The answer is definitely no. Right, all the DeFi platforms that we speak to definitely do not desire to implement KYC and AML. That being said, more and more of them do realize that with institutions entering into the space, there is a lot of money to be made from these institutions. And they also then recognize that in order for these institutions to feel comfortable transacting with them, right, they do need to adhere to certain compliance standards. Otherwise, these institutions wouldn't be able to clear their own internal compliance in order to transact with these DeFi platforms. So with that in mind, it's more about market forces driving them to do it. And I think because of that, we'll see more and more DeFi platforms actually opting in until at least, guidance from the DeFi that trickles down into, national jurisdictions require them by law to have in place these compliance processes.
Ian, thank you so much. It was a pleasure having you here. And people have your contact, so can ask further questions directly to you.